huffing and puffing and screaming about how strong their case is and everything. Because usually, yeah, the person on the other side of the law there is going to be a little player. Trump was a very unique case. This is a guy who was the government, who was the president, running for president again, billionaire, obviously, supported by the entire Republican establishment. You don't want to set a hard rule there for, oh no, well, the federal government needs to make its case to the public in a stronger manner before, they actually get to the courtroom, or maybe even before an indictment is issued.
From their jobs. Did you tell that to someone at the FBI?
People are not removed for
just
case
answer my question.
It's just crazy.
Did you tell that to
People
someone?
are not removed for case.
Right? So they went through and they looked at every single person that had just been assigned to a Trump case, and they fucking fired him.
Thank you very much, Aaron. And I know, Jack, you're coming from Washington, which is the land of acronyms. And to make you feel at home here, welcome to the GCDC at UCL. So your biography is very well known in the United States, but maybe less so to this audience. So bear with me while I go through it, and then we'll start our conversation. So Jack was a graduate of Harvard Law School. He was a career prosecutor. And the unusual part, I think, of your background is that Jack was a prosecutor at the state level in the United States, at the federal level in the United States, and also internationally. I really can't think of anyone who has that confluence of experience. In addition, something that's sort of dear to my heart is you were also a prosecutor at sort of main justice, which is in Washington, so that's centrally, but also in the field in various parts of the United States, not just in New York, but also in Tennessee, as we'll talk about. As I mentioned, Jack started his career as an assistant district attorney, that's at the state level, in New York for the revered and legendary Robert Morgenthau. He then joined the US Attorney's Office in the Eastern District of New York. That is where I also started my prosecutorial career, and as both of us know, it's all downhill after that. In the Eastern District of New York is, I think, everybody who is a federal prosecutor will say the best job you've ever had. But you went on to many great things after that. You went to Main Justice, as I mentioned, where you were the head of the Public Integrity Section that either handles or oversees all of the public corruption cases in the United States. You leaded that, and it should go without saying, but unfortunately I need to say it, and it was the people who were prosecuted were based on the facts and the law, and it didn't matter if they were Republicans, Democrats, Independents, or no party at all, if they had committed a crime worthy of prosecution. As I mentioned, Jack did not only work in the United States. You then had two separate stints at the ICC, which we're going to talk about, at the Office of the Prosecutor for the International Criminal Court in The Hague. You were the chief of coordinations for the Investigations Division. We'll talk more about sort of what you did there. And between those two stints, you went back to the United States, where you were the first assistant, that's the number 2, and then the number 1 in the US Attorney's Office, that's a federal office in Tennessee. You went back to the ICC and stayed there for about 4 years, and then you got a phone call, which is sort of basically why we are here today, and that is on November 18th, 2022, the then United States Attorney General of the United States, that's Merrick Garland, appointed you to be the special counsel for the Department of Justice, looking into two things. That is the investigation that was ongoing with respect to Donald Trump and classified documents, and also the handling of the sort of lead up to an event surrounding January 6th and the effort to prevent a peaceful transfer of power. So with that as an introduction, welcome very much to UCL and to GCDC. It is really just a privilege to have somebody with your background. And I kind of want to start with that European background, because it was something that at the time when I learned that you had been selected, I thought about a lot, which was how the sort of big picture, and I only ask compound questions, by the way, which is many, many questions, but it gives you the advantage because you can choose which one to answer. And so I was really interested about how that informed your thinking about what was happening in the United States. But why don't we start with basics, just to make sure everyone knows, which is first sort of what is the ICC, and then we'll turn to sort of what you were doing there. But let's start with sort of the ground level. UCL is an academic institution, so it seems fitting to educate.
Sounds good. Well, first off, thank you very much for having me here. I'm really excited to be part of this series and to contribute to this discussion. So I did, as Andrew said, I did 2 stints outside the United States. The first, I was the coordinator of investigations at the International Criminal Court. And what I did there, that is a court, I think many of you know, is a court of, they call it the court of last resort. It's where cases that national bodies either can't or won't do are investigated and, if appropriately, prosecuted. And they often they can involve political leaders, they can involve militia leaders, they can involve genocide, crimes against humanities, war crimes, things of that nature. My role there was to coordinate the investigations. And so what that meant was I had a real hybrid role. I would help design investigative strategies, and that could include how are we going to collect evidence, how are we going to protect witnesses, how are we going to take statements, are we going to memorialize them this way or that way. That's sort of like nuts and bolts work. And I also went out in the field with my teams and actually conducted the investigations with them when it was appropriate to do so. So that's what I did at the ICC. I came back and the ICC is based in The Hague in the Netherlands. I came back to The Hague in 2018, and that work was, I was appointed to lead a tribunal, and it was a European Union tribunal that was investigating crimes that occurred in the Balkan War, particularly crimes that occurred in Kosovo between 1998 and 2000. And that job, I had all the responsibilities for everything from running the office, managing the budget, deciding how we investigated cases. Again, I participated in the investigations personally because, and this is in a lot of international justice cases, a big issue, a big rule of law issue is often these cases can't or aren't brought because of obstruction of justice. And that means that witnesses are either intimidated or threatened or sometimes even killed, and that's why the cases aren't able to go forward. And so that's something, particularly this last job, building witness protection programs. I actually had a diplomatic role where I had to work with countries to help get them to support us in relocating witnesses when necessary, so those witnesses felt safe to testify and tell their story. And in that job, I also, in addition to investigating the cases, when the cases went to court, I participated in the trials as well. I gave the opening statements and closing statements at the first two trials. So it was kind of a, everything I'd learned from doing this for 25 odd years was put into play in those roles.
And were you sent either the first or second time from the United States as part of the government, or was this a private role?
Right, so the first time it was a private role. I just left the US to work at the ICC, and it's in the United Nations system. The second time, in 2018, I was technically an employee of the US State Department, and I was seconded to this tribunal. It was a European Union tribunal, and different countries that weren't in the EU contributed different ways. If I recall, I think Norway paid for the courthouse, Switzerland paid for our outreach program, and the US provided me to run the prosecutor's office.
So that seems like a fair division of. So getting to sort of my larger question is, coming from that background, seeing the challenges to the rule of law and how you hold people to account globally, so what were the lessons learned, and how did that make you think about the assignment when you got a call to be the special counsel on a matter involving a former president of the United States?
Yeah, so I learned a lot being an international prosecutor, and I will put what I learned into two buckets. One was practical things I learned, and then the other was sort of reaffirming principles of being a conscientious prosecutor. So, and to keep in mind, I had been a prosecutor for a good long time before I'd had these positions, and so I was learning based on what I'd done before. And so, from a practical point of view, one of the things that was a great experience for me is where I'd had leadership positions in the U.S. before, I was often being asked to be a leader in places where people already knew me. Like when I was in the Eastern District of New York, I was the chief of litigation there. People had seen me try cases. They knew who I was, and I was able to rely on that to be a leader. When I went overseas, nobody knew who I was, and unfortunately, at the time, no one knew what the Eastern District of New York was. So nobody was impressed. You had to actually be a leader kind of on your own merits from day one. I also learned to handle big cases, how to move big cases forward. And this was kind of a reaffirming principle and a practical one. From your first day as a prosecutor, one of the things you are taught is that delay helps the defense, and moving case forward expeditiously is not only in the public interest, but it actually helps your case. And that's because witnesses' memories can fade, witnesses can pass away. It can give the individual who wants to obstruct your case more time and opportunity to obstruct that case. And so for those reasons and many others, you learn from the time I was a baby prosecutor in New York, move your cases forward expeditiously. In the international realm, as again, those of you who follow it may know, cases, if left to their own devices, move very, very slowly. And they will not move unless you make them move. And so the sort of things I learned earlier in my career about how to move cases forward, this was sort of the major leagues. You really had to know how to handle every part of a prosecution to make it go forward. And at the ICC, and also the other job was the Kosovo Specialist Chambers. And so that was a thing I learned, and it was...
I complain about this a lot, that sometimes when people talk, sometimes people say, they just don't say anything. They just like yap, and they don't really say anything of substance. And then there are other people who are like very substance rich. I don't know why some people like this and some people aren't. I have high hopes for this conversation. So it's interesting that he's already given a couple like grounded, factual, no bullshit examples of things. Like how are you a leader in a new world where nobody knows you, right? Well, in a world where you already have some reputation, you can step in and people automatically give you that credit. And in a new place, they don't give you that credit at all. You have to rebuild it. Or this idea of one thing you learn as a prosecutor is something I know with my own case, which is why it's funny that the plaintiff is stalling, is that the faster it moves, typically the better it is for the plaintiff side. The slower it moves, typically the better it is because it gives the defense more time to do things or whatever. Sorry, I point this out because sometimes I feel like you guys still link me people who I feel like say absolutely fuck all and nothing, and it's like, how the fuck does anybody think this person knows what they're talking about? But, okay, sorry, I'm done being triggered.
Practical things within that, for example, like how to deal with a very large data set. I mean, you can imagine investigating a war crime that happened 20 years ago, how much data you're taking from so many different sources, how to streamline translation processes, all things like that, all the sort of nuts and bolts that people aren't seeing on the surface, but that make a case move faster or not. I learned a lot about that. One of the other sort of practical things that was really helpful to me is when you're a young prosecutor and you're doing a lot of cases, you get feedback all the time because you go to court, you deal a case, you win or lose, juries like it or not, judges like it or not, and you move to the next case. And you get better doing that. When you're doing giant cases that take years to put together, and often years to prosecute. You don't get that feedback. The case is not being tested in the crucible of litigation until a very late date. And again, this is something I knew as a young prosecutor, but I really learned even more is how to build in processes to test your assumptions while you're investigating the case. So you're always testing, well, this is what the evidence shows me to date, but is that right? And you're creating an environment where people, if they have a different point of view, can speak up, and you're sort of red teaming it or battle testing the case while you investigate it, so that by the time you get to court in that case, the hope is you will not be hearing anything from the defense in that case that you have not thought of and your team has not thought through itself. I put that into play immediately when I got back from working at the ICC. My job after that was, as Andrew said, at the public integrity section, supervising these prosecutions of political corruption cases around the United States. And we were rigorous about looking at every aspect of a case to make sure we could understand not only how we were thinking about the case, but how the defense would think about the case. And so, in that job, I regularly asked the defense attorneys for people we were investigating, come in, let me hear your side of the story. I want to make sure I got this right or not. And sometimes I would learn things that I had not.
Has this guy announced that he's running for something yet? This guy on the left, stage right, is Jack Smith. This is the guy who was in charge of the federal case. He was the special prosecutor against Donald Trump, I believe, for both federal cases, right? It was for the January 6th one that would have been the grand case of, did Trump obstruct the rights of Americans to have their voice and vote heard? And then also for the more specific Mar-a-Lago, the classified documents thing. But he was the special prosecutor for both of those cases, both of which were voluntarily dismissed, I believe, before Trump assumed office, with the assumption that Trump would obviously kill or cancel these investigations. So,
thought of otherwise. And so building those processes into big cases was really helpful. And then just on the other side, the reaffirming things. I was taught as a young prosecutor, no fear, no favor. I was taught as a young prosecutor, you do the right things, you do it the right way, and for the right reasons. And when I was a young assistant district attorney in Manhattan, I thought that's what you were taught at the Manhattan DA's office. When I got to the Eastern District of New York, I was like, wow, that's the same philosophy here. We do it the same way. When I got to the ICC and what I tried to imbue on the people in my office when I was running the last office overseas was those same sort of principles. And what I found is that public servants who want to be good public servants, wherever they are, that those are really guiding principles. If you do those three things, do the right thing, do it the right way, and do it for the right reasons, if you're hitting those marks, you're going to be okay as a prosecutor.
So something you said reminded me of Robert Mueller, the sort of revered former FBI director, used to always say if something was taking too long, he would just call you in and say, "You're playing with your food," which was, that's like you did not want to hear that, which was basically like, move it along. And he had been a prosecutor for many, many years. I'm interested in thinking about the international space still, and we'll turn to those lessons coming to the United States.
Why didn't he make Trump cancel those cases? So my understanding, I think, is that the cases can theoretically be brought back now. But if Trump were to kill them, there are ways that he could kill them that could permanently taint them or make it so they can't come back. I don't know if that was the case or not. I'm not sure. I think that was the reason. I doubt they will be brought back, but they should be.
This is a big preamble to this question, which is when I worked for Robert Mueller when he was special counsel, I spent a couple years studying Ukraine. And actually, when I left, I thought, well, I'm never going to need that information again. That's a joke, by the way. There was a very famous trial in Ukraine where President Yanukovych, during his tenure, there was a trial of his political adversary, Yulia Tymoshenko. And it was widely viewed as a show trial. It was denigrated by almost every single European nation, the Republicans and Democrats in the United States, and condemning it as a show trial. And with that as a preamble, how do you, having seen what can happen globally, how do you sort of differentiate in your head a righteous case from a show trial? Because obviously within that country, they're not going to say it's just a show trial. They're going to be thinking of it as like, well, this is just another righteous prosecution. And how were you thinking about that distinction, that you want to make sure that when you're bringing cases and when you're examining a potential case, that it is an actual righteous prosecution, as you said, sort of the three rights and not a show trial?
Yeah. So unfortunately, through our history of mankind of having courts, there have been show trials. And the way I think you can differentiate them, overarching, a show trial is a trial where the outcome is predetermined, where we're going to get to this outcome however we need to get there. And I think the two factors that you can use to differentiate a righteous prosecution or righteous case from a show trial is process and transparency. A lot of people think this is boring, but process is the great protection of individual rights.
Yes.
Do we have processes And are they administered equally for everyone? So do you have a right to counsel? Do you have a right to put on a defense? Can you appeal the decision? And then are the laws being applied to you the same way they're being applied to everybody else? That's challenging with rich and powerful people the world over. But on one end of the spectrum, you can go back to Stalin's trials of the Bolsheviks, right up to the trial of Alexei Navalny, right? That the outcome was predetermined. And as a prosecutor, the role we play in a case is making sure that the choice to bring a case is not predetermined. The judges or the juries in certain jurisdictions will decide the outcome. But as a prosecutor, when you take on a case, there should not be a predetermined outcome. That's one of the really wonderful things about a career as a prosecutor is you have to be able to build something, and if you find as you're building it that it's not righteous, that's the way it goes. And so I think making sure processes are applied equally, that is critical, and it's a good way for you to measure if something is legitimate or not. If you see someone who is driven by an outcome, and they're going to get that outcome no matter what, you should be very suspicious of that, whether it's as a prosecutor or a judge.
And then, so I can't help but point out the irony that we are having this conversation on the day of the arraignment of the former FBI director, James Comey, in the Eastern District of Virginia with many procedural irregularities.
Please comment.
You also mentioned
Don't say that you won't
in addition to
comment.
process, you mentioned transparency.
We need you.
As something else that you think about in differentiating sort of a righteous prosecution and transparency. Could you talk about sort of what you mean by that?
Sure. And again, take the Navalny trial. We know that whenever he was going to offer a defense, they decided to not have those in public and not have the public access to it. Same thing,
Navalny
and I
was
should be clear.
Putin,
a lot of times in a prosecution,
opposition
if there's sensitive
candidate who
information
died
or
in
protection of
prison
witnesses, you can't
recently,
make everything
right?
public if you're going to also say
think he died in
protect
prison,
witnesses
right?
or protect sensitive information. But the goal should be to make as much of it public as possible and make your reasons for doing things as public as possible. I think when people don't understand what the courts are doing and don't understand what prosecutors are doing, that's when distrust happens. I mean, another way I think of it is, if we want trust in our government institutions, it comes down to three things. And this is, I'll put it in the lens of a prosecutor, which is what I know. One, you have to be competent at what you do. You have to know how to do it. You have to have experience at it and talent at it. And you have to be someone who actually knows the rules of your profession. The second is you have to have integrity.
Listen to the difference when he talks about the importance of experience here, right? The difference between the Democrat hack prosecution of Donald Trump, this guy who's got experience at literally the fucking ICC, versus who's the hack fuck that they have bringing some of the indictments down now? Isn't it like some woman who's she's never tried a criminal case in her life? What's the name of it's a woman, right? Who am I thinking of? Is it Thompson? What's her last name? Oh, Halligan, I think. Just such a difference in approach. It's such a joke.
You have to be a truth teller and someone who can be trusted to do things for the right reasons. But the third one's often the hardest, is you need to be able to communicate 1 and 2 to the public. You need to be able to let the public know that you're a truth teller and you actually know how to do this. When you don't have a transparent process, it's impossible to do those things. It's impossible to, whether you're competent or not, it's impossible to show that. And if you are competent, you shouldn't be afraid of a transparent process.
So what do you think about whether there should be cameras in the courtroom? This was a big issue in the United States, as there were 4 separate indictments, 2 federal, 2 state,
This is a super interesting question, because the United States, I believe, compared to other Western countries, we have a very, very, very open, more than most people, a very open court process from start to finish. And I feel like there are legitimate arguments to say that, well, this could taint a jury, this could influence the outcome. People might act differently on camera, poker players do, versus off camera. And in other places, like the United Kingdom, for instance, there are a lot of times gag orders on everything related to the court process or the trial process until the trial is over. This is one of the things that Tommy Robinson gets in trouble so much for, is, marching outside and trying to do whatever bullshit he is when he's restricted from commenting on trials or getting footage of them or whatever. He does a lot of this shit sometimes. In the United States, we tend to be very, very, very open with all of our stuff, obviously, right? You can go read all my court filings and everything that's filed. The state courthouses, I generally have cameras and everything. Federal courthouses generally don't have live video. I don't know what the difference is there. Maybe just a tradition or whatever, or federal stuff hasn't changed. But there's pros and cons, I think, for both approaches.
Of Donald Trump and related people. And I think it was it is not allowed. And what's your view, given your sort of view of transparency, as to whether, if you could wave a magic wand and sort of decide what the law is, whether that should be allowed, or are there potential upsides and downsides in the way you think about that?
Yeah, and so I've worked in different jurisdictions, and I'm familiar with different jurisdictions who've answered that question in a number of different ways. In the federal courts in the U.S., they're not permitted. In a lot of state courts, they are permitted. In international courts, it's interesting. They do a different thing where you might live stream the proceedings, but for certain witnesses or their identity of the witnesses, that's not public. They sort of do it piece by piece. In some child abuse cases or domestic violence cases, I've seen it be public except for that. For me, and we oppose there being cameras in the courtroom in the investigation and the trials or the cases I had as special counsel, because my problem with it is I think that's something transparent as possible, but I think people behave differently when there's cameras and it affects the witnesses. I think there's more of an argument maybe for it, situations where there aren't witnesses testifying, but I think I am concerned that it changes how people behave in the court, and that's a difficulty, but I do why people want to do that, and as I said, it's happened in some jurisdictions. I just have a concern about that, about how it affects how people behave in the proceedings.
What about safety? One of the concerns that people have raised about concern about safety, there's obviously been a huge rise in threats and actual violence that's happened across the political spectrum in the United States, and sort of how does that, if at all, weigh in sort of the idea of having people and people's faces on camera?
I mean, it's a very real concern. I think I referenced before the last case I had at the Kosovo Specialist Chambers. Those cases, the investigations of war crimes in Kosovo, until we brought the cases we brought, all attempts to bring those cases were pretty much unsuccessful because of the intimidation and the outright murder of witnesses. And so when we did these trials, and one of the trials is still going on, that was live streamed, but at times certain witnesses and either part of their testimony or their identity was completely blocked. And I want transparency. I don't like that, but I can't put witnesses' lives at risk for that. And that's why I say we should be trying for as much transparency as possible without affecting the integrity of the proceedings or the safety of people involved in them.
It's important to keep in mind that this is a balancing test, right? Because you have multiple interests at stake here, and it's very annoying when people represent these things as though there's one very obvious answer. Should witnesses be forced to be, say the TV example, or say just in general, disclosed publicly? Well, should they be forced to be disclosed publicly? Well, no, of course not. That's not fair. We want them to maintain some privacy. It's okay, well, hold on. Does that mean that anonymous witnesses can make accusations with no accountability ever? And then, people who are accused, it could be for civil matters or criminal matters, just have to endure an onslaught of random accusations against people that can never be mentioned publicly. And then on the flip side, right, so you're saying anybody that's going to make an accusation against somebody has to now put their name out into the public zeitgeist on court records that are going to be there forever. So now make what accusations, they might have a legitimate accusation, it might just not survive the trial process, but that's forever on that person. There's no simple answer here. It's a balancing test. There's a huge public interest for the reasons that Smith has gone over. There's a huge public interest that the public has. There's a huge public interest in having all of this stuff open and transparent, so you don't get these weird secret government courts where crazy stuff is happening. But the public interest has gotten a little bit cancerous now because the internet has enabled so many more people to take an interest and engage in harassment campaigns, coordinated harassment campaigns. In the past, if it was 1995 and somebody's oh my God, my name's gonna be published on the internet because I was associated with something, okay, who cares? Your school might harass you, people in your neighborhood maybe, but that's it. But nowadays, the entire world, it's a balancing test. Somebody said you made a mistake with that generalization of that the U.S. is open and places such as Europe are more closed. You can't use the UK as a representative example. The U.S. is not a big... Okay.
So final question about the ICC before we turn to the special counsel investigation.
Sorry, that sounded really dismissive. That might be true. The only other court system I've read any cases on or anything were the UK. So maybe everybody else is as open as the US. Maybe, and I'm only familiar with the UK. Maybe the UK is more closed than normal. I don't know.
Counsel investigation. The United States has had, I was thinking about this beforehand, whether I could describe it as a love-hate relationship. And I'm not sure maybe it's sort of a hate and revile relationship with the ICC, in that it's never been totally embraced, and various administrations have various views about how much they sort of want to partake of its mission. There is talk currently about sanctioning the ICC, and somebody who worked there and seen its work, what's sort of your view of sort of TAC and what the...
Fuck, I'm so curious. So somebody please tell me what there's a concept that the ICC is supposed to follow that has to do with the idea of you always get to take the crack at justice. You always get the first crack at justice. The ICC, somebody in a YouTube chat, I think, asked, what do they think about what's going on with ICE and everything in the U.S.? The ICC is not supposed to be the court of first, fact-finding to hold somebody bad accountable in their country. Your own courts are supposed to get the first shot at that. And it's only when everything else has failed that the ICC is supposed to, I don't remember. Somebody know this. We're going to sit here until somebody figures it out. Is it complementarity? It might be complementarity. Complementarity. Maybe it is that one. Okay, I think it is that one. Fuck me. It is. It absolutely is that. Okay, yeah. But in the United States, we don't consider ourselves. We're not signed on to the Rome Statute. We don't allow the ICC to have any oversight of the United States at all, even if we theoretically were unable to prosecute stuff going on in our country. And he's worked in the ICC as a United States background lawyer. That's interesting to me. I wonder what his take is on that.
The United States position should be with respect to the ICC. How's that for a small question?
So, let me start with this, just some background. In terms of the U.S.'s relationship with the ICC, the U.S. ultimately did not sign the Rome Statute, which created the court. It didn't become a member.
Yeah.
But over the years, the U.S. has assisted in the arrest and transfer of defendants before the court. In the Libya and Darfur cases, the U.S. is on the Security Council. They could have blocked those cases from being referred to the SEC. They did not. And the most interesting one is with Ukraine. We're talking not so long ago, 2022, 2023, bipartisan support in the United States for supporting the ICC's investigation of Ukraine, including sharing evidence with Ukraine, and I believe even allowing interviews on U.S. soil related to those cases. So it has not been a thing where the U.S. has been, against this court at all time. They've tried to find, I think, over the history, times where
we just don't want to be subject to its jurisdiction.
Support. I don't think the sanctions are a good idea, and I particularly don't think sanctions of judges is a good idea.
True.
Judges need independence to make their decisions. Judges, like prosecutors, should not be thinking of their jobs as popularity contests. They need the room and space to make decisions that some people might not like. And I can't imagine a situation in the United States where we would impeach a federal judge because of the decision that they made in one particular case. Wow. The effects that would have on the independence of the judiciary, I think, would be terrible.
True.
And I don't know why that would apply any different in an international context.
Very true.
And this administration has, in fact, imposed sanctions in Brazil, quite pointedly on the country, as well as on the sort of lead judge in the Bolsonaro case. So that is something that is happening in the United States. But as I said, I'm going to now turn away from the ICC to the special counsel. And maybe the first thing is we should just, since you're from Washington, I'm going to throw in my Washington
I'm not from Washington. I am currently living in the vicinity of Washington, but I am not from Washington.
This reminds me so much. I lived in Washington I'm a veteran New Yorker, and I lived in Washington for 10 years. And I used to always say that when people said I'm from Washington, I'd be like, no, I'm not. And my friends from New York would turn to me and say, you're not a New Yorker anymore, which was just like a dagger to the heart, because if you're from New York, you're completely chauvinist about it. But let's level set. That's the term I wanted to use in terms of what the special counsel is. Like what sort of creates it? Where does it exist in the structure of the sort of three parts of government in the United States: the judiciary, the executive, the legislative?
Sure. So the special counsel is, there are several statutes that allow it to happen, that authorize it. And then there are regulations that are very specific to when you would appoint a special counsel, what their powers are, and the range of things that they can do and how much they're supervised. So usually...
Fuck, I hope he asks about Thomas in the immunity case opined on whether or not Jack Smith's appointment as a special prosecutor was constitutional. Thomas said that it was an unconstitutional appointment, only for Jack Smith. I don't know why, just for him. I don't remember the dog shit argument he used. Eileen Cannon used that, the federal judge in the, is it the Southern District of Florida, to kick the can down the road on the Trump Mar-a-Lago documents case until he eventually got fucked because Trump got elected. I wonder what Jack Smith's opinion is on that. I wonder if that'll come up.
And I should also say, special counsel or some form of that, the United States has had varying types of situations where special counsels or something with a similar title have been used for decades upon decades. There was a period of time where there was an independent counsel statute where the person brought in was actually not in the Department of Justice. They were actually outside the department and appointed by a judge. That was in the, I'm going to say, the 80s into the 90s. we've gone back to special counsels that are in the Justice Department. My position was very similar in a lot of ways to the special prosecutor in the Watergate case. And so usually a special counsel is appointed when there is either a conflict of interest or an other extraordinary situation where the Attorney General determines that it's in the public interest to have someone who is not been in the department right at that moment and works under the normal supervision that you have in the department to come in. And so I was appointed under that regulation, and the role of the special counsel is to independently and objectively investigate whatever the particular assignment is. Andrew mentioned earlier what my assignment was, and come to a conclusion about should a case be brought, and if a case is brought, to be the person who brings that case.
So you're housed within the Department of Justice, and as somebody who's been at the Department of Justice, particularly in Main Justice in Washington, and as well as somebody who's been in the field, who's aware of all of the rules that exist that sometimes people in the field balk at, as special counsel, what was your responsibility in terms of all of those rules? Because this is something that I think people don't really understand. When I worked for Special Counsel Mueller, I think people thought, oh, you're sort of apart and separate and you do your own thing. And what's the reality of that in terms of what there's a huge manual for the Justice Department called the Justice Manual, and it's tomes, huge volumes of rules that you have to follow. What did you have to do? Yeah,
so this is a great point, because as I said before, one of the things that can tell you if the rule of law is being enforced properly and that something's not a show trial or show investigation is process. And as Andrew says, in the Department of Justice in the United States, there is a lot of process. And so as a special counsel, I'm governed by that process. I'm a Department of Justice employee. So for example, if I want to get approval to do certain charges, like in our case, some of the charges involved election fraud and the sections 371, we need to get approval from the public integrity section to do those charges. National security charges require...
So can I just interrupt you? So one of the things that I take it that the department did is because they wanted to have some uniformity and experience brought to bear before a public corruption case was brought, any prosecutor in the United States would have to, before bringing those charges, submit it to the public integrity section, and they would have to decide yes or no. Is that's
right. They would have to approve it. And it's the same thing with what's called the election year sensitivities policy in terms of when you can bring charges like this. It's the same thing with classified documents or a classified case. The National Security Division weighs in on that. It could be anything, even simpler things, like if you want to subpoena an attorney, there's an office in the Department of Justice called OEO that you need their approval to issue a subpoena to an attorney. If you want to subpoena records of a member of Congress, you need to get approval for that. There's a number of approvals like that, and those are process things that mean that the person in the special counsel's role, my role, has to follow those rules. And so there's a regularity to that that I can't just do what I want. I have to do it within the rules of the department.
I can't help but there's a huge sort of what seems to be a contretemps, or maybe it's just a tempest in teapot of today, where certain people are claiming that there was either electronic intercepts or some kind of improper spying, I think that's the word that's being used, on senators that was sort of an outreach or a part of your investigation. And I guess the first thing I will say is, having looked now at your indictment, and then I went back and looked at the length. Okay,
I said this before about history teachers. I talk about them, but it's really everybody. We're a little over halfway through this. I feel like we run into this issue in society where everybody is like scared to get political. Like maybe they'll get political over, like social issues, like being pro-gay or LGBT or whatever. But like they don't want to get too much into like the politics of stuff, so they try to be as neutral as possible. I feel like this is a mistake. Like I think we need some stronger statements on stuff that's going on from our best and brightest and most educated people. It can't be that and I don't know if they're explicitly doing it here, and I'm sure like these organizations that host these events and everything don't want to be seen as politically partisan, but like this is a very special prosecutor, right, who's got a lot of experience, who's involved in like a pivotal case in U.S. history, or it was going to be. It's still important that even the indictments were brought. I really want some stronger statements from him about his thoughts on everything going on now, and not like the most coldest, detached, nonpartisan, apolitical, sanitized statements ever. And then I can tune into Bannon and Trump Jr. and everybody else for how they feel about the politics center. Like, don't be so afraid to comment on stuff that's going on. This fear of appearing partisan, the conservatives don't have it. Okay, just
report that you issued. One, it seemed pretty clear, and tell me if I'm wrong, that what is transparent in both the indictment and in the report is that we're talking about telephone records, not not an electronic intercept where you hear conversations, just getting toll records, and it's completely disclosed in the indictment and or the report, and that you would have to get approval to do that if it involved a member of Congress. Is that a fair?
Like, this is not a real conversation. I don't want to insult either of these two men. Definitely not Jack Smith, who's my god. And the interviewer guy, Andrew Weissman, is also an accomplished prosecutor. So I'm not insulting that, but like, this question here, this is not a real thing. Like, the Trump admin didn't think that they were being unfairly prosecuted or maligned or that the process or procedure wasn't followed. They're making it all up. They know they're making it all. All of this is a fucking lie. I feel like this was perfectly demonstrated with when Rosenstein was being questioned by Jim Jordan, and Jim Jordan's like, well, we heard that you guys were tapping our phones and everything else. He's like, we can't do that. That's not a thing. Or like, we don't have recorded. We can't do this stuff. Like, what you're accusing is not even possible. Well, in the media we were this. Then go interview them. Why are you asking me these questions, right? Like, that's the energy that we need. These are not like real concerns or real issues that the Trump admin has. And to just get a bunch of answers where it's like, oh yeah, like, no, we definitely follow the appropriate process and procedure, and we feel about, like, I need something more than this.
Statement?
That is fair. That is correct.
Okay. That's my leading question for the day. So tell me a little bit more about your team. So you get a call and you're now selected. Who joins you? And maybe to be more pointed, given the environment that we're in the United States, how, if at all, does their political views or even their party affiliation factor in or not factor into your decision about who you would bring on?
Yeah. So most of the people who ended up working on this investigation from the beginning to the end when I was special counsel were people who were already actually working on the investigations when I took over. They were working on the separate cases. I did bring in a few people to assist. Those people I brought in were all longtime former federal prosecutors who had worked in both Democratic administrations over and over again. And one of the topics I really like to talk with folks about, because I don't think it's talked about enough, is the just incredible high level of integrity and competence and willingness to sacrifice of the people who do this work. And I'm talking about the people I worked with in the special counsel's office, but the Department of Justice in the US, the FBI, are filled with people like this. And these are people who are not self-promoters.
We know.
They do not like to tell their own story. They cannot start a sentence with I, they start that with we. These are team players who don't want anything but to do good in the world. They're not interested in politics. And I get very concerned when I see how easy it is to demonize these people for political ends, when these are the very sort of people I think we should be celebrating. The people on my special counsel team were like that. The idea that politics played a role in who worked on that case or who got chosen is ludicrous. And Andrew, and this is another thing that I think if you're not inside the US Department of Justice, the idea that politics would play a role in big cases like this, it's absolutely ludicrous, and it's totally contrary to my experience as a prosecutor from the time I was a junior prosecutor. When I started out, if I had told my boss at the DA's office, hey, I've got this case and I was going to bring it, but I just found out that the guy is a friend of the DA, so maybe we could find a way not to bring it. Or if I said, hey, I wasn't going to bring this case because it's not a legitimate case on the facts and law, but I saw that he was an enemy of the DA and maybe we shouldn't bring it. My boss, my first boss, he would toss me out a window, right? Toss me out a window. When I was the chief of the public integrity section, we were doing the highest profile corruption cases around the country. I had no idea of the politics of people who worked for me because it was entirely irrelevant to our work. And that was the same when I was in Brooklyn, New York. It was the same when I was in Tennessee. And it's one of those things that I think sometimes you hear what's in the news. If you talk to anybody in the department who's been there for decades, that's just not even close to what that work is like. And I don't think that there's enough people out there saying that, because the people who do that, they don't.
I don't know if this is true for everybody, but I've heard a few people tell me this now. So in the past, I used to always tell you guys that, like, even in the military, even in the Pentagon, intelligence, whatever else, people that would talk to me about working these jobs, is they would say that these are incredibly apolitical work environments. Like, it's kind of like, it's a super faux pas to be talking politics at work. Like, maybe, like, even guessing people's political alignments could be difficult just because people people didn't talk about that kind of stuff when they were working. I've heard people tell me as of recently, especially after Trump too, that like that norm has kind of changed a bit, that people will, they're not like screaming it across the office, but they're like a little bit more open talking about stuff now, and that just seems to be a norm that is going away. I don't know if that's universally true or if it's just a couple people that have spoke to me that have said that. If you have any experiences with that, email me. I'm just curious to hear the feedback if that is a thing that's changing or maybe not.
Want to be out front talking about those things, putting themselves sort of in the limelight. They just want to do good work. And so the people on my team were similar to what I saw throughout the department during my career. Apolitical people who wanted to do the right thing and do public service.
One of the things that you mentioned when we talked about the ICC is your experience needing to move cases along and the need for speed that you had learned as a beginning prosecutor in the DA's office. When you were appointed by Merrick Garland, there were all sorts of people, second guessing him with respect to the timing of that. And if you look at the time that you were appointed, the question I have for you is sort of like, how did that need for speed sort of factor into what you were doing? Obviously, if Donald Trump were to win the presidency, which he ultimately did, sitting president as opposed to a former president, and whether Merrick Garland should have done this earlier or later, you were sort of, as I would describe it, you had to play the hand you were dealt. You were not there until you were there. And so, to what extent did that need for speed play into how you were approaching what ended up being the two criminal cases that you brought, the one in Florida involving classified documents and the one in Washington?
This is hard because your inclination, I would imagine, to say, well, speed plays no role into anything because, we just want to do a good job and make sure the facts are there and everything else. But he said it before, prosecutors, you kind of want to hurry. There are statutes of limitations. You can only have long evidence here. And with this case here, with the president, Weissman, is it really Weissman or Weitzman? When Israel land, we call them Weitzmans. If the guy's elected, then you kind of lose your one crack at this case. So the time actually, the speed thing kind of does matter. Again, I feel like this is probably somewhat of a balancing test. You don't have time to interview and depose every single potential person and chase down and prioritize at some point.
In D.C. involving the insurrection.
Yeah. So obviously, as I said before, moving a case forward expeditiously is something any good prosecutor is going to do. We did not need an election or any arbitrary date to justify or to motivate us to move the case forward expeditiously. I think that a lot of the narrative that you're talking about is people who just would not read things we did about why we did what we did. There is black letter, unopposed in any way, Supreme Court precedent that says moving cases forward expeditiously is not just the defendant's right to a speedy trial. The public has an interest in the expeditious prosecution of cases.
Yes.
And we said that. The courts agreed with us. The district court agreed with us. The appellate court agreed with us. Even the Supreme Court, that didn't expedite the case as much as we wanted to, they did expedite it. And so that motivation to move the case forward for proper legal reasons that have been cited by our Supreme Court, that's what motivated us, not any particular arbitrary date.
I should note that I think the case that you're referring to, the lead case in the United States, and this is for the law students who are out there, it was written by, of all people, Justice Alito. About the fact that the right to a speedy trial is not something that is only something that the defendant enjoys, but the public has a right to a speedy trial.
Yeah, it's not a controversial position. I mean, that's the most recent case, but there are other Supreme Court cases going back, again, decades that say that, and that's never been something in contention.
So turning to the Mar-a-Lago case, the classified documents case. So first question, that I think I know the answer to, and I was always very curious as to what you would say. But so why did you bring it where you brought it? Why was it brought in? Lots of people were second guessing that particular issue, probably less because there had some sort of issue concern jury pool, but because of the judge who ultimately was assigned to it, who was, in my view, rightly
Cannon, I think, right? This is the one.
Provoked a lot of criticism of her rulings. But why was it brought in Florida? What were the other options? Or was it you never really thought about any other place?
Sure. So two things here. One is kind of I just wanted to address the note you said about, some people criticize things. I think one thing, and it kind of will explain a lot of my thinking about these things, the idea of people criticizing things, particularly in the media, if you are a good prosecutor, that is noise, and you need to tune it out. I think people in the media can do a very good public service in explaining what's going on in court and explaining legal concepts that are complex. When we get to the point of people opining, you should have done this, you should have done that, good prosecutors learn to tune that out. I know whenever I've done a big case that no matter what I do, people are going to think I'm a villain, and some people are going to think I'm a hero. Some people are going to think I'm great, and some people are going to think I stink. You tune that out. You just have to tune that out. And so like whatever was going on in the media about that, I don't have any idea about that because it's not something I follow. Actual case. It was very important to me that we do all our work by the book, and that means the same way you do it in a DOJ case if it wasn't a case of this much public interest. And under that way of thinking, the place to venue this case was in Florida. There were arguments you could venue parts of it other places, certainly, and there are times that the DOJ venue pieces of cases in different places, but the usual way is to have it in one place. And in this particular case, the documents were in Florida. The major acts of obstruction, the 2 series of obstruction that we charged in the case happened in Florida. And I would also the last point I would just add is we didn't have the immunity decision that came later. But if we had, by charging it in Florida, all the conduct that we charged was after the presidency. And so the idea that any of this will be official acts would be a lot less than it otherwise would have been if we had charged things that had happened in Washington, D.C. beforehand.
And just for context, the Trump immunity decision was about the Supreme Court's interpretation of what immunity should apply to a sitting president. And so if you have the Mar-a-Lago case, which is focusing on conduct that is about what the former president documents, not what he did while he was in office, in the same way that the Manhattan case.
Maybe. You don't know that, though. There's no guarantee for that because Donald Trump's decision to take things from the White House could fall under that, the immunity thing, right? The Mar-a-Lago case wasn't about his conduct after he was president. You're talking about documents that he took when he was president. So you could make the argument that that's unprobable as well. We have no idea. That criminal immunity case could go because we haven't had a chance to test it yet.
Was largely about what happened where he was president. And so the immunity decision is bound by when was Donald Trump in office. So you were focusing in the Florida case about a period that is after he was no longer president.
Correct.
There was a lot of discussion in connection to the documents case because of events that happened with respect to Vice President Pence for Donald Trump in the first administration and the discovery of classified documents in his possession. And then a similar issue with respect to the then sitting president of the United States, Joe Biden. And in terms of your thinking about the propriety of the Mar-a-Lago case, once those cases were out there, how do you, like, when you're thinking about it, and we talked about show trials versus righteous prosecutions when we were talking about the ICC, how do you answer people who would be saying, well, wait a second, it's just, they're all the same, and the Department of Justice and the various special counsels, you and Rob Hur came to very different conclusions. How is that fair? Shouldn't they be the same? How do you justify the case in Florida when the same criminal case was not brought with respect to either a Democrat or a Republican?
Yeah, so I think this is actually a great example to talk about the rule of law and enforcing the law equally. And just as a sort of background, that case, the Biden case you're talking about, I didn't have any role investigating that. Another prosecutor, another career prosecutor, a guy by the name of Robert Hur, who
Wouldn't the obstruction portion be after he was president, though? Well, but remember, obstruction is obstructing like the investigation or a particular thing. But like, my guess is that if you can throw out the original charge, I don't know if the criminal obstruction stuff stands, right? Like if a cop, let's say that a cop tells you to get in your car and you say, no, fuck you, whatever, they force you out and then they arrest you, you're probably picking up like an obstruction charge on top of whatever they originally charged you for. But if you find out that the original traffic stop was illegitimate, I don't know if you can get a criminal obstruction charge on its own if the original conduct, no probable cause to arrest a person, or there was no reasonable suspicion to detain somebody, do an investigation. There was no PC to arrest somebody. I don't know if you can get obstruction if that charge would stick. So if Donald Trump were to say, oh, well, no, actually, I declassified these psychically, or I just decided to when I took them, by default, that's the assumption. So I can never be charged with a crime here, right? Because remember, for the retention of classified material, that's a mens rea question of like, did you intentionally take it out? Did you intentionally know that you were mishandling classified material? Whatever I want. It's conduct when he is president. So I think that would come up. That would be a defense they would try for sure.
I didn't have any role investigating that. Another prosecutor, another career prosecutor, a guy by the name of Robert Hur, who had actually been the U.S. attorney in Maryland under the first Trump administration, took on that matter. Like I issued a report in his case about his findings, and he found that it was not warranted to go forward in that case. And this is what matters, is both cases involve classified documents, and one was in Mar-a-Lago, which was a social club, and also his home, and the other one was in, I think, largely in Biden's home, also I think an office that he worked at. The difference is the facts. The rule of law allows for different outcomes when the facts are different.
True.
One of the major differences between the two cases is the obstructive conduct of the case that I investigated. And that's important for a couple different reasons. One reason is to prove illegal possession of classified documents. You need to show that you possess the documents, or the defendant possessed the documents
knowingly,
willfully.
Yes, everybody forgets this part when it comes to the classified documents thing. Fuck! Nobody ever talked about this because they tried to say that Biden did the same crime and that Pence did the same crime that Trump did. That's not true. If you read the criminal statutes, you have to knowingly, and same thing with Hillary Clinton as well. This is why for Hillary, this is why for Biden, this is why for Pence, there wasn't a criminal charge there. There were no indictments, is because what you have to prove is that they knowingly, willingly, that they knew that they had material outside of where it was supposed to be. That's a super important underlying element. Now, when I said earlier, I don't think you could go after the obstruction if the first cause is fine. I think you can use obstruction to point towards state of mind, right? Like if you're trying to obstruct something because you know, like I think that can give you an indication of state of mind. Like if I say, if I murder somebody in my home and then the cops show up and I say, oh my God, like I call 911, like I think I killed my mom. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. It was an accident. And they come in and my mom's laying on the, kitchen floor and she's bleeding and there's like a Band-Aid or whatever on their neck. It's like, okay, fuck, maybe we go to court, who knows, whatever. But let's say in another world, I call 911 and I say, hey, my mom is missing, and they show up at my house and I'm like, I don't know where she was. Maybe she's, downstairs, and they find her backyard. And it's like, oh yeah, I put her out there because I'm not sure. Like, okay, well, it seems like you know that something was fucked up here. Your actions.
That means he knew what he was doing was wrong. The illegal possession of classified documents. You need to show that you possess the documents, or the defendant possessed the documents willfully. And that means he knew what he was doing was wrong, and he knew he was possessing the documents. In my particular case, we had tons of evidence of willfulness.
Yep,
we had in the obstructive
evidence.
That
was in the indictment.
Publicly saying these are my documents or things like that, and I can keep them. The evidence to not give the documents back when the government even tried to get them back before there was a criminal investigation. Those sort of things. And then after the investigation started, still refusing to give them back and then trying to obstruct the investigation. That helps prove willfulness. That sort of evidence didn't exist in the other case. And there are, I could probably keep you all here for a long time talking about the differences in terms of, the numbers are not, I want to make sure I get this pretty close to right, but almost 4 times as many documents that the person I was investigating compared to the other case. The sensitivity of the documents. I think Special Counsel Hur said that the documents that he most likely could bring a prosecution on were over 15 years old and dealt exclusively with the conflict that had ended in Afghanistan. As we alleged in our indictment, the documents I was dealing with
Department of Energy, right?
were much more sensitive and much more recent,
stuff.
And we laid out the sort of subject areas, those sensitive subject areas in the indictment. So there were a number of differences between the case, and that is what the rule of law wants, is to have situations where different factual outcomes, different levels of proof can result in different outcomes. And that's what I think happened here.
We talked briefly, and you mentioned the Supreme Court's immunity decision. And one of the things that the court wrote about in that case was the concern about starting a chain of one president if you didn't have presidential immunity.
Everything when it comes to the law is a balancing test. I hated the fact that the Supreme Court didn't, for a microsecond, for a single fucking sentence, Roberts didn't consider at all the other side of the balance, which was, right, he's going to bring up the fact that, are we going to start prosecuting all of these presidents for crimes? And it's like, excuse me, are we going to start having every president committing crimes? Why do we not even consider this? Criminal law exists for a reason, and it's because we have a public interest in there not being criminals. We don't want there to be crime. It's so important that the state themselves have standing to bring criminal prosecutions to individuals that have committed crimes, even with no other citizen doing it. The idea that, well, what if we're going to start prosecuting presidents? Sure, that's a thing to be worried about, but we're also really worried about a bunch of presidents that are fucking criminals. Arguably more. I think we have a very big concern as U.S. citizens who rebelled against we would say a tyrannical king that wasn't allowing us representation insofar as our how we were governed. I think we have a huge interest in not having a president beyond criminal reach.
President coming in and then turning around and indicting the former president and on and on. I was wondering, what was your take on sort of the decision and particularly that concern of seeing that prospect, which we had not obviously seen in almost 250 years, where we didn't have a regime of presidential criminal immunity. Not to bias Mike, to say what my view is.
That's fine to say.
How did you think about that?
That's fine to say. Yes, it has never been the assumption of the United States of America that the president of the United States is beyond criminal law. That is a concept that puts the president of the United States, I don't even like saying as a king. It's not as a king. It's above the king, because for like 800 fucking years since the fucking Magna Carta, even the king in England was not considered above all criminal law. That's just not the case. That's a crazy concept in the United States.
Not to bias Mike, to say what my view is, but like, how did you think about that decision and particularly that idea, that concern about were we going to just spiral down into a tit for tat in each time there was a new party controlling the White House?
Yeah. So the first thing to talk about is just the decision generally. We argued for a different outcome, so obviously I was disappointed in the outcome. But I think a really important thing to understand here is, while I didn't agree, and I'll talk in a minute about the reasoning, I didn't agree with it, we followed it. There was never a question that we were going to follow the law as the Supreme Court said the law now was. And I think that's really important to understand, because I think once we get in a position where we start talking about maybe not following court opinions we don't like, we are lost in terms of the rule of law. And so
True.
The reasoning, I very much agreed with the reasoning in the dissent in that opinion more than the majority, but that was the law. In terms of that particular point, I would say two things. First, if you looked, and we have this if you're interested in it, it's in the final report that I wrote with my team, that how you can think about these issues is on a spectrum. If you look at how the district court, the appellate court, and then the Supreme Court thought about these things, and then the dissent and the majority in the Supreme Court, there were rule of law considerations, the things we're talking about tonight, and then there were also considerations of giving the executive enough latitude to act, and I think the word was boldly and fearlessly, so it's that the executive would be able to lead the nation. The district court and the appellate court and the dissent strongly weighted the rule of law considerations. The majority opinion strongly weighted the other considerations, and to your point, brought up the scenario of, well, if you do this, then there's going to be this response. My view on that is a couple things. One, I think if you do that, it's tantamount to saying you can never prosecute powerful high officials, because there could always be a concern that they'll stay in power and then come after people. The problem is not prosecuting high officials who did something wrong when you do it according to the processes of law in your country. It's the retaliation. That's the problem, and that's the thing that we should be preventing. And also, in the history of our country, what they're talking about, when we've done that, it hasn't happened in the past. And so I disagree with that. But again, that's the reasoning behind the opinion, the ultimate opinion. The law is what it now is in terms of official acts being immune, and that's something that we have to follow.
Something that's perhaps a little bit in the weeds, but one of the key things that in the United States everyone could sort of watch and see in terms of transparency, people could turn on their televisions and see on January 6th what was happening. And they could also hear the president on January 6th at the Ellipse giving a speech that there were various components to that speech, but one component was we need to fight like hell. And there was a real concern that people had that this was
that they were going to go and do that,
tantamount
which they did,
doing exactly what happened. In your charges, when the case was ultimately brought.
No, this is the boring, or I don't know, maybe not. No, it's interesting. Sorry, why didn't you charge for obstruction, or why didn't you charge for incitement? But that's just a super scary question that you don't. That's a broader question. It'd be interesting. How do you decide which charges to bring? I'd actually be interested. Maybe he'll get into that here, I guess. But I feel like that bringing a political violence incitement charge to the speech of the president of the United States, that's a terrifying thing to try in court, because the implications for that are so far-reaching. And maybe it's not even your strongest charge, maybe too. But
in D.C. on election interference, it was interesting how you dealt with that, because what was not charged was just that that speech incited the violence. That is the charge. That this was sort of fighting words that would satisfy the Supreme Court standard for inciting sort of imminent violence. And I was wondering what the thinking was as to why you used this as sort of background facts, but not sort of a core charge.
Sure. So, and this is addressed, again, if you're interested in our final report. The long story, or the short story, I guess, is that we had core charges that we did bring that we thought were very supported in the law, very factually supported. The statutes that we did charge had a long history of use in the United States. They've been interpreted by the Supreme Court, and we felt we had a strong case, and that those charges that we brought would allow us to present all the relevant evidence to a jury, that we would be able to present everything that mattered to a jury. And while I understand that reasonable people can think we should charge incitement or insurrection in particular, very little case law interpreting that, certainly not to this extent that the other statutes that we brought. Incitement, understand the reaction, and I could see where people could find this to be incitement, but at the same time, as you know, that's a very high standard under the First Amendment analysis, and frankly, I did not think that those were fights that we needed to take on given the charges that we were able to otherwise bring.
So you had mentioned transparency, and we talked about that sort of periodically.
Yeah.
And one of the things that, I worked for Robert Mueller, who was famously tight-lipped and very much had the traditional view, which still exists in the department, Merrick Garland espoused it, which is euphemistically known as put up or shut up, meaning that you don't go on TV and start talking about the guilt or innocence of a particular person, and you don't actually even talk about whether they're under investigation, except in extraordinary circumstances. And that's sort of one model. There is another model, and that is Archibald Cox. And Archibald Cox, as you mentioned when we were talking about Watergate, and there was a forum of special counsel, he was a Harvard professor, and he gave, and you can actually go to YouTube and still see it, this wonderful press conference where he talked about why he was going to the Supreme Court to seek the Nixon tapes. And he made it very clear at the outset that there were things he could talk about and things he could not talk about, meaning he was not going to denigrate anybody who had not been charged, or even somebody who had been charged. That was off limits, but he did want the public to know why he was doing what he was doing. If you watch that, part of what he was doing, to me, was not just giving the intellectual reasons, but he was an exhibit for his own integrity. Mm-hmm. It's so hard to watch that and not think, here is a lovely, mild-mannered Harvard professor, and you might disagree with him, but he made it very hard to vilify. And I was interested in your view, at least in retrospect, whether there was more that you could do and more that the department needs to do to figure out how to publicly speak, and so that the megaphone isn't only on one side.
Yeah, so this is a really important question, and I think it's a complex question. So let me break it down to a few pieces. The Robert Mueller view of how to do this, that's where I come from. That's my view, and that's really how the Department of Justice does it, I've seen throughout my career. And there's a reason for it. The reason is you do not want to be saying things before a trial that are going to make it hard for the defendant to get a fair trial. Right? You don't want to be sort of polluting the jury pool in your favor, saying things that because the usual case is a case where the government has a lot of power and has a megaphone, and the defendant most often doesn't. And so those rules, that way of doing things, has been a department tradition. And in fact, a lot of the local rules of the courts that we practice in limit what you can say as a prosecutor. And so in my role as special counsel, I handled things very much as I did throughout my career. It's like we often say, do your talking in the courtroom, not on the courthouse steps. And so that's how I did things. I think that it is worth a conversation going forward about how we move things and how we handle things and how we think about these things. Now, I'm not arguing in favor of a sort of wholesale, one side blasts something out on social media and then the other side doesn't. We do that sort of thing. But I do think we need to think about it differently because we're in a different age now and we communicate with each other differently. The Archibald Cox thing, if you haven't all seen it, it's worth, when you go home tonight, you got nothing to do for half an hour, pulling it up on the YouTube. It's artful, it's heartfelt, its integrity is just oozing out of him. It's also really hard to do. Partially because to do that without making an argument you're not interfering with the defendant's trial rights is really hard. There's unique situations you can do it, but this goes back to my previous point of if you want to have confidence in our institutions of government, you want there to be a bond of trust between citizens and the government they put in place. You have to have competence, integrity, and you have to communicate it. That third one's hard, and I will say that kind of dinosaurs like myself who've done it the old way, I think we need to have a conversation to think about how to be better at it, but I don't want to have that conversation where we start interfering with people's right to have a fair trial. So I think it's a good endeavor, it's a thing we should talk about, but I also think it's harder than we think. Rules of the courts that we practice in does it.
Off limits, but he did want the public to know why he was doing what he was doing. If you watch that, part of what he was doing to me was not just giving the intellectual reasons, but he was an exhibit for his own integrity. It was so hard to watch that and not think, here is a lovely, mild-mannered Harvard professor. And you might disagree with him, but he made it very hard to vilify. And I was interested in your view, at least in retrospect, whether there was more that you could do and more that the department needs to do to figure out how to publicly speak, and so that the megaphone isn't only on one side.
Yeah, so this is a really important question, and I think it's a complex question. The Robert Mueller view of how to do this, that's where I come from. That's my view, and that's really how the Department of Justice does it, I've seen throughout my career. And there's a reason for it. The reason is you do not want to be saying things before trial that are going to make it hard for the defendant to get a fair trial, right? You don't want to be sort of polluting the jury pool in your favor, saying things that because the usual case is a case where the government has a lot of power and has a megaphone, and the defendant most often doesn't. And so those rules, that way of doing things, has been a department tradition. And in fact, a lot of the local rules of the courts that we practice in say limit what you can say as a prosecutor. And so in my role as special counsel, I handled things very much as I did throughout my career. It's like we often say, you're talking in the courtroom, not on the courthouse steps. And so that's how I did things. I think that it is worth a conversation going forward about how we...
So Jack Smith is cucked too? No, so the issue is that he's right. When the government is prosecuting a case, almost all the time, the government is the big dog there. You're a little individual citizen, right? Even state governments are oftentimes dwarfing everybody except massive billionaires, maybe multinational companies that might have jurisdictionally venue-wise, some state law or whatever. But like generally speaking, the government's the big dog there. And when it's the federal government, that's the biggest of the big dogs. So you don't usually want the federal government out there, pumping their chest up and, huffing and puffing and screaming about how strong their case is and everything. Because usually, the person on the other side of the law there is going to be a little player. Trump was a very unique case. This is a guy who was the government, who was the president, running for president again. Billionaire, obviously, supported by the entire Republican establishment. You don't want to set a hard rule there for, the federal government needs to make its case to the public in a stronger manner before, they actually get to the courtroom or maybe even before an indictment is issued, because you don't want to set that precedent. But Trump is a very, very rare case, yeah.
We move things and how we handle things and how we think about these things. Now, I'm not arguing in favor of a sort of wholesale, one side blasts something out on social media and then the other side doesn't, we do that sort of thing. But I do think we need to think about it differently because we're in a different age now. We communicate with each other differently. The Archibald Cox thing, if you haven't all seen it, it's worth, when you go home tonight, you got nothing to do for half an hour, pulling it up on the YouTube. It's artful, it's heartfelt, its integrity is just oozing out of him. It's also really hard to do. Partially because to do that without making an argument you're not interfering with the defendant's trial rights is really hard. There's unique situations you can do it, but this goes back to my previous point of if you want to have confidence in our institutions of government, you want there to be a bond of trust between citizens and the government they put in place. You have to have competence, integrity, and you have to communicate it. That third one's hard, and I will say that kind of like dinosaurs like myself who've done it the old way, I think we need to have a conversation to think about how to be better at it, but I don't want to have that conversation where we start interfering with people's right to have a fair trial. So I think it's a good endeavor. It's a thing we should talk about, but I also think it's harder than we think.
So given what we have seen in the Department of Justice under the second Trump administration, and given your history as a state prosecutor, federal prosecutor, working under Republican and Democratic administrations, and your work at the ICC, what's your diagnosis of what is happening to the department? And similar to the question I had about what happens when the next president comes in and the tit for tat concern, are we also at the Department of Justice leading to a spiral where, let's assume we have a Democratic administration at some point, and what do they do then? Do they try and clean house? I mean, does it become a tit for tat where we essentially no longer have a civil service in the federal government, which is supposed to eradicate this issue of we only hire Democrats, we only hire Republicans?
Remember, I've said this a million times. The only reason the Republicans go as hard as they do is because they think that we're not playing tit for tat. There's a reason why, when that immunity case came out, there was not a single Republican that was worried when Biden was president. None of them were like, oh my God, what's Biden going to do? Even though they spent all that time telling you that the Democrats were corrupt, that they were engaged in lawfare, that they were going to use horrible, none of them were really concerned about it because they knew that the Democrats just don't play that type of game. But it's why every Democrat was like, oh shit, is this guy about to start assassinating political opponents? Nobody was saying that about fucking Biden or the Dems, not for real. Nobody actually gave a fuck. But if they did think that that was an issue, you better fucking believe that the whole country would have felt way differently about that ruling. Criminally immune presidents? That's not fun when you think the other side might engage in criminal acts.
Which is supposed to eradicate this issue of we only hire Democrats, we only hire Republicans. So how do you see where we are and the prospect of what's going to happen?
You're right about the compound questions, by the way. That's definitely.
Yeah.
Let me break that down and take it in, I think, reverse order. Yes, I think the attacks on public servants, particularly nonpartisan public servants, I think it has a cost for our country that is incalculable. And I think that it's hard to communicate to folks how much that is going to cost us. If you think getting rid of the people who know most about national security is going to make our country safer, you do not know anything about national security. And that's happening throughout the department. It makes me concerned. And, this idea that
happened.
If you didn't vote for the current person in office, you can't be trusted to be a government employee. In the United States, we tried that. It's called the patronage system, where you got the job because of who you supported, not because you knew how to do the job, the competence part. And we know that it's rife with corruption and it's rife with incompetence. And so that makes me very concerned going forward. But in terms of what I see now, and it goes back to the analysis that I gave you before, if you are driven to achieve certain outcomes, no matter what, that's a real problem. That's not something I saw in the Department of Justice, and I think it bears mentioning. I worked in the department for years, Republican, Democrat, Republican. I was the acting U.S. attorney in the first Trump administration in Tennessee. Nothing like what we see now has ever gone on. This case in New York City, where the case against the mayor was dismissed.
Yep, that Eric
in the
Adams
hope that
ship.
he would support the president's
Insane.
political agenda. I mean,
Never.
Just so you know, nothing like it has ever happened that I've ever heard of. Recently, we had this issue of I guess it was people in the Defense Department using Signal to communicate with each other about
Not
war
okay.
plans. Clearly classified information.
Yep, and no backups,
I can tell you,
no
Andrew
history,
will tell you,
no
there
records.
is no administration, Republican or Democrat, that does not open an investigation in that situation.
Yep.
Nothing. Where the lives of servicemen are put at risk, zero. Never happens. So again, when we get to a place where the outcome is what matters and not the process, and the last one I'll just throw out is this latest prosecution of the former director of the FBI. There's a process to secure an indictment. There's a process of predication, having some evidence before you do that. And again, I only know what I see myself in the media, but the career prosecutors, the apolitical prosecutors who analyzed this said there wasn't a case. And so they brought somebody in who had never been a criminal prosecutor.
Lawyer, the
on
insurance
days
lady.
notice to secure an indictment a day before the statute of limitations ended.
Joke.
That just reeks of lack of process.
Yep.
I'll add to that, the Trump-selected U.S. attorney resigned over this. So not just the career people, but also a national presidential selection resigned. And if you listen to the president, was fired, but in another way was pressured out to not bring the case.
Yeah, and I just want to be clear, too. I don't see, and I think a lot of Americans do not see this as a political issue. Process shouldn't be a political issue, right? Like if there's rules in the department about how to bring a case, follow those rules. You can't say, I want this outcome, let me throw the rules out. That's why, frankly, you see all these conflicts between the career apolitical prosecutors I worked with, because they're being asked to do things that they think are wrong, and because they're not political people, they're not going to do them. And I think that explains why you've seen the resignations, you've seen people leave the department. It's not because they're enemies of one administration or the next. They've worked through decades for different administrations. It's just they've been doing things apolitically forever, and when they're told, no, you got to get this outcome no matter what, that is so contrary to how we were all raised as prosecutors. I think that's been the center of all the conflict.
So I'm going to end with a couple sort of questions about some more personal ones. So sort of obviously in the United States, there's been a lot of vilification, but particularly of you and your team. And if you don't want to talk about yourself, just sort of what have the consequences been in terms of just the personal lives of either yourself or your team in terms of how they have to live, whether they can find jobs? What is it like to have to live through that kind of harassment for what seemingly is just doing your job?
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting for me is, I lived my life in a way where I was not seeking to be someone whose name people knew, right? I was a prosecutor, a public servant, and having done this job, now I'm this guy where people interact with me in a way that they didn't before. But I'm really just like one of many sort of public servants who want to do their job, want to do the right thing, want to be public servants. And so, yes, if you don't know, everybody who worked on my team was fired, not just the lawyers, but the administrative staff as well.
Crazy.
I think these are people who have spent...
Where is this disgusting little fucking rat fuck piece of shit? We never watched this on stream, but I watched some of this hearing. Wait, why can't I find this? Was it Cory Booker asking the questions? It was some congressional hearing with Kash Patel, and they were asking him, like point blank, were you firing people from the FBI because they raided Mar-a-Lago? Did you fire people because they were doing their job? They didn't decide. It's not like a bunch of FBI boys got together and like, let's go fuck up Trump. And he wouldn't answer the question. So the answer is obviously yes, they did. And they basically get there. Fuck, which hearing is this? 1 hour and 44 minutes. It must be during this hearing, right? This was 1 month ago? Was it that long ago?
All right. Once Jack not made any decision.
9 months ago. It wasn't that long ago. Congressional hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Patel, in addition to the extensive purge of nonpartisan career FBI official reports indicate that dozens of remaining officials have been suggested.
This is a joke that if you don't do our political prosecutions, if you've done your job in the past ever, like think of the message that they're sending. When I talk about tit for tat, when I talk about prisoners, think of the message they're sending, right? Even if a Democrat is elected, you better be careful what the fuck you do, because when a Republican comes in, if you help them with anything, your ass is grass. You're gone. This is actual deep state shit. Well, they've accused the Democrats of having a deep state for so fucking long that like now they're trying to instill this concept of retroactive punishment for following orders from the head of your FBI, from the head of the DOJ, that you can't go after Republicans?
Have been suggested.
Right, Trump truthed it out today, right? What did Trump, I hate that language. No, that's way too old. About the pardon for Santos, right? Where Trump was talking about how, he votes Republican. Like, what the fuck?
Have been subjected to polygraph exams to test their loyalty. My understanding is that approximately 40 officials have been asked to sit for a polygraph during your administration, and several have been asked whether they have ever made negative comments about you. Director Patel, FBI agents pledge their loyalty to the Constitution of the United States, not you personally. What is the basis for requiring polygraph exams of your workforce and asking them if they've made negative comments about you?
I don't know what reports you're referring to, Ranking Member, and I reject any reporting that has false information in it, so I'm not going to respond to that.
Listen to how he phrases things. It's like Taylor Lorenz, okay? Listen to these fucking liars. Listen to him. Listen to how carefully phrased that was, right? I heard that you fucked my mom. Media reports said that you fucked my mom. Well, I don't know what media reports you're referring to. I'm not going to respond to any media reports that are saying stuff that's wrong. And I'm not going to respond to that. So let's go to the next question, right? He didn't say that it was wrong. He didn't say it was a lie. He didn't say that it was untrue. He just made a couple of disconnected statements discreetly that are true on their own that allows him to move to the next question without purging themselves, right? All of this is very intentionally done, the way they answer questions.
I don't know what reports you're referring to, Ranking Member, and I reject any reporting that has false information in it.
No
so I'm not
shit.
going to
Everybody would reject reporting that has false information in it.
So I'm not going to respond to that. As far as polygraphs go, generally they are always and always have been utilized at the FBI to track down those that leak sensitive information and have unauthorized disclosures to the media, and we will continue to use them to ensure the integrity of the FBI.
Did any individual on your senior executive team, the director's advisory team, or who serve in the positions on the 7th floor receive disqualifying alerts on their polygraphs?
Senator, I'm not going to get into the personnel discussions that were had on a polygraph. Those are private discussions, and many of them relate to ongoing investigations.
Did you or Attorney General Bondi provide any individual with a waiver so they could remain employed after they received disqualifying alerts on their polygraphs?
I'll have to get back to you.
You have to get back. Did you give somebody a waiver to remain employed after they were disqualified for some other reason? You have to get back? You don't know the answer to that? What do you mean you don't know the answer to that? The fuck?
They received disqualifying alerts on their polygraphs.
I'll have to get back to you.
You don't remember that?
How do you not remember that?
No, sir. My priority is protecting the American public.
Fuck off.
Not getting into the weeds of polygraphs.
And to have a decent memory when you come before a committee.
True.
I'm happy to talk about all the good work the men and women of the FBI are doing, including provided the lowest crime rate in American history. If you want to talk about how to protect the citizens, Chicago has seen a 30% reduction in its murder rate because of the men and women of the FBI. I'll happily do that. The interagency partners and the men and women of the Chicago PD have never been more powerful.
Include local law enforcement, please.
Have you ever seen my testimony across this country where I always lead with our interagency partnerships with state and local law enforcement? It is the pillar of what I am doing. And on the 7th floor, for the first time in FBI history, I have installed police officers and sheriffs right on my 7th floor to report to us every day what's going around the country on the street level, because that is a priority of the FBI and is the only way we are going to work. I don't take credit for anything, but I will defend the men and women of the FBI and the cops that help us get it done.
You should. Director Patel, to your knowledge, did a whistleblower ever make a disclosure to Attorney General Bondi indicating that the New York field office was withholding Epstein-related records?
I'm not familiar with that whistleblower.
You know that there was such a whistleblower?
I'm not familiar with that whistleblower.
This is my fault, okay? First, I gave the world Hassan and Vosh, and then I transmitted the conservative debater strategy to the mainstream Republicans, which is the I don't know defense, okay? And it is unbeatable. I'm sorry.
In response to the blowback she received, Attorney General Bondi also pushed the FBI to review approximately 100,000 Epstein-related records on an arbitrarily short deadline in March, and the FBI was directed to flag any documents that mentioned President Trump. Nothing came of that review until July, when DOJ and FBI released an unsigned memorandum stating there is no incriminating client list. Why was this July 7th memorandum unsigned?
Would you prefer I've used AutoPen?
Fucking epic! Oh my god! Oh. Keep in mind that the guy that's answering questions right now concerning the firing of people who weren't loyal enough to the current president is a man who's written children's books about how Donald Trump is the king of the United States being hunted by the evil wizard Hillary Clinton, right? And that's who's being asked questions right now about how he runs our federal Bureau of Investigation. It's a fucking joke in so many different ways. Embarrassing.
Unsigned.
Sorry, 3 books on it, not 1. 3 children's books.
Would you prefer I've used AutoPen?
Well, why was it unsigned?
The memorandum had the insignia of the Department of Justice and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And in our effort to secure transparency for the American people, because the 3 prior administrations had not done so, we conducted an exhaustive search of everything related to the Epstein cases, and we produced what was legally and permissibly able to be produced to Congress and the American public.
So
and there's a congressional subpoena, and we're continuing to do so.
Did you personally direct that investigation so that you would sign such a...
Did I personally direct what investigation?
Of the Epstein records for any reference to President Trump?
Again, you are citing reporting that I think is baseless.
He's asking you a question, you rat fuck. He's asking you.
Reference to President Trump?
Again, you are citing reporting that I think is baseless. We conducted an investigation of the Epstein case files pursuant to the direction of the President of the administration to provide all credible information, and we are working with Congress pursuant to a congressional subpoena to turn over all the documents we can. All individuals.
Who at DOJ and FBI was responsible for its drafting and conclusion?
I'll have to get back to you on that. I don't know.
Many individuals at the Department of Justice and the FBI are responsible.
There was no lead?
It was a group project. It was a group project. Yeah, no lead investigator, no lead person, no lead management, nobody. We've obliterated, we've gotten rid of all hierarchy now. We're DEI wokies. There's no bosses anymore. You all show, what is it, fucking, are you fucking Valve now? Is Gabe Newell leading the FBI? You're all equal employees? Give me a fucking break.
Person?
The Attorney General leads the Department of Justice, and I lead.
Attorney General leads the Department of Justice, not the FBI. That's not what we're talking about, right? We're talking about who conducted the FBI investigation, who led that. It was Kash Patel, almost certainly. He was personally tasked with overseeing this by Pam Bondi, who was personally forced to by Donald Trump. Absolutely, right? That's why he's avoiding answering anything directly about any of this.
The FBI.
So the Attorney General was responsible for that?
The Attorney General leads the Department of Justice.
It won't answer anything. Thanks, we know that. That's, yeah.
Director Patel, much like you, Deputy Director Dan Bongino was a conspiracy theorist who built a lucrative career making inflammatory and unsubstantiated statements about the FBI that would be disqualifying in any administration that cared about nonpartisan law enforcement. For instance, Mr. Bongino called the placement of pipe bombs outside the DNC and RNC headquarters on January 6, quote, an inside job, and went on to say, this was a setup. I have zero doubt, and whoever goes into the FBI, you better get an answer about why. Director Patel, you and Deputy Director Bongino are now leading the FBI. What is the evidence to suggest the pipe bombs placed outside of the DNC and RNC on January 6th were an inside job?
I appreciate the opportunity to discuss Director Bongino's mind record. So many on this committee and the media jettison our 31 years of public service.
Oh
Can you answer the question, sir?
I'm answering the question. You're questioning the integrity of the Deputy Director of the FBI and I'm going to answer the question. The pipe bomb investigation is ongoing, and I'm not going to discuss the details
ongoing?
of
How
the
many more
pipe bomb
months do you need?
investigation.
How many more months?
Mr. Bongino was a Secret Service agent for 15 years, a
cares?
police officer for 5. I served this country in
Loser
multiple administrations for
podcasters.
16 years. We were also private citizens, and we are now back in government service. And what we have the ability to do is set aside our personal beliefs to deliver the mission of justice for this country, and we're doing it day in and day out. And I find it disgusting that everyone and anyone would jettison our 31 years of combined experience that is now at the helm of the FBI, delivering historic results at historic speeds for the American people.
So you have no evidence.
I got a lot of evidence, and I'll give it to you when I can.
Looking forward to it.
Right. That means
There's
never.
a New York Times story this morning about Chris Meyer. As I understand it, he was your personal pilot, at least for some period of time. Mr. Meyer has quite a record himself. Flew over 350 hours as an Air Force pilot on 3 aircraft types in Afghanistan. Mr. Jardina, another former FBI agent, a 1999 graduate of U.S. Naval Academy, commanded 100 Marines in combat during the 2003 invasion of Iraq, participated in several firefights, followed up with 2011 deployment as a reservist to Afghanistan, where he interrogated senior Taliban officials. It appears that you terminated these 2 agents. Why?
I'm not going to get into personnel decisions that we made.
So you're not accountable for your decisions to take people who've served our country so admirably and terminate them without any cause?
That's a one-sided story. Anyone that has been terminated
tell your side.
tell your
failed to meet the needs of the FBI and uphold their constitutional duties, and you providing a one-sided story from your purge is absolutely disgraceful, because the men and women of the FBI deserve better. And your attack on the current leadership of the men and women of the FBI is equally disgraceful, because now you're attacking the leaders that are our brave SACs in the
me tell you
field
what's
who are
disgraceful.
doing the job that this
Disgraceful.
country needs.
It's
And we
disgraceful.
will continue to do it.
Excuse me, it's disgraceful when Mr. Meyer and Mr. Jardina, who served our country so well, are terminated apparently because of the rants of a podcaster.
That is
all
your
it-
opinion. It is not a fact.
You don't have anything to the contrary.
My opinion I can back up with fact. Let me ask you to explain the situation in Baltimore.
Was it always
if
like
you
this?
will.
No.
Did you read the story about the termination of the project in Baltimore?
Which story?
764 Group?
Sorry. Which story?
764 Group, the Baltimore agents were investigating. Are you familiar with that?
No, sir.
Well, I'm not going to go into detail. It would take too long to do it. But apparently that this group, 764, a nihilistic, violent extremist group, seeks to blackmail children to perform vile acts on a camera, under investigation by Baltimore, which was terminated by you. I'd like you to respond in writing, if you will, as to the circumstances of that termination.
Sure. Our operations against NVEs, as you're referring to, has been historically high, and we've taken down multiple NVE rings, including 764 rings, who are harming children and causing them to be mutilated and
Last
commit
question.
suicide.
Can you explain why you are eliminating the requirements for a college degree for your agents?
I appreciate the opportunity to address that. You said in your opening statement we are reducing the training requirements at Quantico. We are not. We are expanding them. You're referring to an 1811 crossover program, because I believe the men and women of places like the DEA, the ATF, and the Marshal Service and the Secret Service who want to work at the FBI should deserve that opportunity in a shortened bridge program, which we provided. We are also keeping the 18-week BFTC as is traditionally been held at the FBI. So we're not reducing any requirements. We are increasing those that we bring into the FBI.
Did you change any of the requirements on college degrees?
We are allowing police officers who have served for a number of years to come into the FBI who did not obtain the requisite college degree to
yes.
apply to be
So
federal
yes.
agents, because we feel they have
So
the street
yes.
level experience we need to conduct this mission.
So
I yield,
yes.
Mr. Chairman.
Sorry. God, what is this? This is part of a longer hearing. It's actually, this whole thing is just a joke. I didn't have the worst parts in it that I was like, whatever.
Their careers sacrificing for the communities they want to protect for our country. I'm really
question
upset
you're asking.
that people like that not only are being vilified, but that it's hard to get their stories out of who they are. Because I think the way we communicate with each other right now, it's very hard to tell a narrative. Because if you saw the narratives of some of these people, I mean, they're just briefly, there's an agent who worked on our case, who served our country overseas, multiple combat tours, decades as an FBI agent, fired days after his wife died of cancer. People hear these stories, no one's going to think that's okay. So, yeah, I think that's real.
The reporting on that is the senior career FBI people tried to get Kash Patel, the FBI director, to put off the decision given his personal circumstances, and failed. And this most senior person at the FBI making that plea was then fired.
Yeah, I mean, these are people, lawyers aside, these are people who put their lives on the line. And for them to be fired for stuff like this, I just don't see how anyone can hear those stories and not be moved by it.
And then have people sort of landed on their feet, or has it been a struggle? Obviously, I think people know there's been all sorts of executive orders targeting law firms. There's been actions targeting people, targeting companies, and a chilling effect as a result of that. And to what extent has that sort of affected people on your team in terms of their lives going forward?
Yeah, well, the good thing for the folks on my team is they're excellent lawyers, and they are people who are really good at their profession. There is a chilling effect out there, and there's a lot of bad in it. The good, I will say, is we are living in a moment where you get to find out who people are. You get to find out what institutions stand for, or companies, or law firms. And so I think it's been revealing for all of us about the different ways things have gone there. I think the folks on my team in the long run will be fine because they're good people, and I believe that they're going to have good outcomes. But the stuff their families have had to go through as a result of this, again, if you knew the stories of these people, nobody would think that's okay.
Any final thoughts that you have for our audience about sort of the rule of law, thinking about what we're experiencing in the United States, and how you sort of think about it, having seen sort of the rule of law globally?
Yeah. So, I think of public service as a privilege, and my life it's been so great to live the life I had as a public servant. Not only the things I've got to do, the things I've got to be a part of, but the people I've got to work with. And when I talk to young people a lot today, I see people concerned about a career in public service, or having second thoughts about a career in public service because of the moment we're in. And my message would be you should double down on that. You may have to find a different way to serve the public than you planned, but it's such a privilege. It's such a good way to spend your days and live your life. And I think having something hard to struggle at is one of the best things you could possibly have in your life. And so I think we're in a moment now where people have to think about what matters to them. And if they believe in things like the rule of law, they believe in democracy, if they're blocked in helping the way that they thought they could help, they need to take that commitment and find another way to be part of the solution.
That is a wonderful way to end. And speaking about public service, it's your public service coming here and speaking to us tonight is part of that. You are deserved a great deal of thanks for doing your work. And thank you so much for coming here and sharing your thoughts.
Okay, sorry, hold on. This one real quick.
Oh.
You also guaranteed Senator Blumenthal that every FBI employee will be held to this absolute same standard. No one will be terminated for case assignments. Testifying today that you never terminated anyone at the FBI, in whole or in part, because of a prior case assignment.
No one at the FBI is terminated for case assignments alone.
Well,
Did you hear that? Did you hear that fucking answer? Did you hear this fucking disgusting rat fuck piece of shit? Did you fire anybody? A case assignment is just you're assigned to work on a case. That's it. That's not your choice, as I imagine. Generally, maybe you can request assignments, but like it's just a case you're assigned to work on, right? Was anybody fired because of a case that they were assigned? Well, nobody was fired just for that. Why would that even be a factor?
Are you testifying today that you never terminated anyone at the FBI, in whole or in part, because of a prior case assignment?
No one at the FBI is terminated for case assignments alone.
Well, I'm asking about you, Mr. Patel. Did you, in whole or in part, terminate anyone at the FBI because they worked on the Trump investigation or because they worked on January 6th?
No one at the FBI has been terminated for case assignments alone.
Okay, you're saying alone. Does that mean they were terminated in part because they were assigned to a January 6th case or assigned to the Mar-a-Lago case? You're being very precise here, Mr. Patel. You're saying alone. That means they were fired in part because they were assigned those cases.
That's what it sounds
like. Is that your
like.
testimony?
Absolutely not. But if you want to keep
Okay,
putting words
well,
in my mouth,
then
go
let me
ahead.
ask you, let's strip away the word alone. Did you terminate or participate in any discipline of any FBI employee in whole or in part because of their work on an investigation of Donald Trump or January 6th? Yes or no?
Any terminations at the FBI by employees.
No, I'm
since
asking you a very specific
And I'm
question.
going to answer the question, but you don't like the answer because it's the
No,
truth
I
and it guts
want
your
an answer to my
narrative.
question. I don't want an answer to someone else's question. So let me just be precise, and I ask for a yes or no answer. Did you ever terminate or discipline an FBI employee in whole or in part because they had been assigned or worked on an investigation of Donald Trump or January 6th?
FBI
yes or no?
employees are only terminated
Yes
if
or
they
no,
fail
Mr.
to
Patel?
uphold their oaths of
Yes
office
or no?
and duty.
You're not
at the
answering my
FBI
question.
I
You're
don't
not
have to
answering my
answer your question yes or no because you're setting up a trap so you can have a meeting and I'm not giving it to you.
Unless it's true that you fired people.
People
in
have
whole
been
or in part
terminated at
because
the FBI who failed to uphold
were
the
assigned
standards
to.
that the
That's
FBI
a script.
requires
Did
them
you
to uphold.
did you tell anyone at the FBI that all FBI employees who they identified who had worked on cases against President Trump would be removed from their jobs? Did you tell that to someone at the FBI?
Say that I would remove people for case assignments?
That you would
Listen to him asking for the specific particular quote. Listen to him, right? Did you go to Cindy's house last night at 8:30? Hold on, wait. Did you just ask me if I, just me, went to Cindy's house at 8:30 p.m.? Is that what you just asked me? Just so we're clear with the exact questions here? Like,
all FBI employees who they identified who had worked on cases against President Trump would be removed from their jobs. Did you tell that to someone at the FBI?
Say that I would remove people for case assignments?
That you would...
Case
that
assignments
people
alone?
that were identified as having worked on cases against President Trump would be removed from their jobs. Did you tell that to someone at the FBI?
People are not removed
Just
for case
answer my question.
assignments.
That's
Just answer
it's
my
just
question.
crazy.
Did you tell that to
People
someone?
are not removed for case.
Right? So they went through and they looked at every single person that had just been assigned to a Trump case, and they fucking fired him. So anybody that was involved in any of the Mar-a-Lago investigations, anybody involved in the raid, whatever, that's what Jack Smith was complaining about at the end of that. That's what I was referring to here. It was this line of questioning. Thanks for clarifying this. It's insane.
No, you're not
assignments,
answering my question.
and I would
Mr.
never
Patel,
tell anyone-
Did you tell someone at the FBI that FBI employees identified as having worked on cases against President Trump would be removed from their jobs? Yes or no? Did you tell someone?
Not just
I
that.
would never tell anyone at the FBI that
they
they're
would be
being removed
for
for
alone.
basically their case assignments.
Just alone.
Okay,
Yeah,
so anyone who
just
said that would be lying. Is that your testimony?
Anyone can say whatever they want.
No, I know, but you're saying they were a liar.
I'm telling you what I said.
Because this is in the complaint against you, Mr. Patel. So you're saying Mr. Driscoll and others are liars?
I'm not going to address the complaint in the ongoing
Okay, well then let me ask
litigation.
you, have you ever told anyone at the FBI that the FBI tried to put the president in jail and he hasn't forgotten it, and that your job depended on the removal of agents who worked on cases against the president?
No.
Did you ever tell anyone that?
No.
Okay. Did you ever tell anyone that you knew these summary firings you were undertaking were illegal, likely illegal, and that you would be sued and later deposed? Did you ever tell anyone that?
No firings at the FBI or terminations were done for anything other than justified
Did you ever
cause.
tell anyone that, Mr.
No,
Patel? Why don't you
no
answer my question?
terminations at the FBI were ever done in my tenure for anything other than failing
Did you ever
to
tell
uphold
anyone
their
that,
oath
Mr.
of
Patel? You willing to
office
answer
or
the
their-
question?
The FBI.
I guess
I
you're
have
not willing to
answered
answer the
it.
question. So let me move on. Let me move on to the Epstein files. You said you're the most transparent FBI director in history, so I'm going to put you to the test. In 2024, you were asked by Glenn Beck about Epstein's Black Book. And you said, he asked, who has Jeffrey Epstein's Black Book? And you said, Black Book, FBI. And he said, but who? That is, I mean theirs. And you said, oh, that's under the direct control of the director of the FBI. That's what you said. Was that true, Mr. Patel?
I'll rely on you quoting it accurately. I did
No,
that a couple
was it
years
true
ago.
what you represented to Mr. Beck and the president's supporters out there, or were you lying? Was it true that the Black Book, Epstein's Black Book, was in the possession of the FBI director?
The Black Book was in the possession of the FBI.
Okay, so now that you're the FBI director, you have possession of the Black Book, right?
That index has been released.
So you have Jeffrey Epstein's Black Book?
What is known as Jeffrey Epstein's Black Book has been released by us.
And you released it. And let me follow up on Senator Kennedy's question, because he asked you, and I'll be very precise here, you've seen most of the files. Who, if anyone, did Epstein traffic these young women to besides himself? And you said, himself, there's no credible information, none. If there were, I would bring the case yesterday that he trafficked to other individuals. And Kennedy, the information we have, again, is limited. And Senator Kennedy said, the answer is no one. And you said, for the information we have. So is it your testimony today that in all the Epstein files, that Jeffrey Epstein trafficked no one to anyone but himself? Is that your testimony, Mr.
I never
Patel?
said Jeffrey Epstein didn't traffic anyone else.
Did he traffic any young woman to someone other than himself? That was Mr. Kennedy's question,
I
Senator
said
Kennedy's question.
the information that 3 administrations have had access to
I'm
have
asking-
made determinations that there are no investigative leads that were credible to prosecute and investigate any others. I'm
Well,
specifically
I'm asking
stating
you whether
we
it's
were
your
working on.
testimony today.
You just read
that
it, and I said it 10 minutes ago, so let the record reflect my testimony.
I just want to make sure there's no misunderstanding, because there are victims like Virginia Guifer who have testified otherwise, said otherwise, and you're telling the American people today that the Epstein list is a single name and it's Jeffrey Epstein. That's what we're to believe?
That's not what I'm saying. That's what you're saying. And
Well,
you
let
can
me-
say
let me
whatever
ask
you
Let me
want.
ask you this. When Todd Blanche went to interview Ghislaine Maxwell, she said, but did I think these guys were coming for that? I really don't. If you met Epstein, there's no way that this cast of characters, of which it's extraordinary, and some are in your cabinet, who you value as your co-workers, and you know would be with him if he was a creep or because they wanted sexual favors. A man wants sexual favors, he will find out. They didn't have to come to Epstein for that. And the next question Todd Blanche, the president's former criminal defense lawyer, asked is not who in the cabinet, who are you referring to? His question is, so when's the last time you think you were with Mr. Epstein when he got a massage? So let me ask you, who are those cabinet members that Ghislaine Maxwell was referring to that were part of this cast of characters associated with Mr. Epstein? Who are they?
The Deputy Attorney General took the aggressive step that no one else did and interviewed Ms. Maxwell for
I'm
2
asking you,
days,
who are
and we
the-
released
who
the
are the cabinet
entirety
members?
of that
Who are the cabinet
transcript.
members?
I do not have that transcript in front of me. You're picking it piecemeal. The American
And
public can read the entirety of
Let me ask
that.
you one last question, because you clearly won't tell us the cabinet members associated with Mr. Epstein. Let me ask you one last question. And that is, right after she gives this testimony in front of an FBI agent, among others, she's transferred to a minimum security prison not suitable for a sex offender like herself. Who made that decision and why?
The Bureau of Prisons.
The Bureau of Decisions made it in
Prisons.
The Bureau of Prisons decided on their own, without any
Mystery.
consultation with Blanche or anyone else, that they were going to suddenly, after this interview, completely unrelated to this interview, completely unrelated to anything she said, move her to a prison not suitable for a sex offender. You want the American people to believe that? Do you think they're stupid?
No, I think the American people believe the truth, that I'm not in the weeds on the everyday movements
Oh,
of
you're not in
inmates.
the weeds?
What I
You're not in
am
the weeds
doing
on
is
anything.
protecting this
The
country,
most- the
providing
most
historic
The weeds,
and
the lazy
combating the
gardener.
weaponization of
The
intelligence
Epstein
by the likes of
files
you,
cover-up,
and we
the
have
exploit-
countlessly proven you to
from
be a
your
liar in
administration,
Russiagate, in
and you
January
believe
6th.
Russiagate,
You are the
the
biggest
Jan
fraud to ever
6th.
sit in the
This
United
stinks
States
to
Senate.
high
You are a
heaven.
disgrace to this
This stinks to high
institution
heaven.
and an utter coward.
I'm
Wow.
not surprised.
Epic.
I'm not surprised
not
that you continue
surprised
to lie
that the-
from
the-
your purge
Everyday
and
inmates, everyday things like interviewing Ghislaine Maxwell, probably one of the highest international interest characters. Like, yeah, was I involved in that? Apparently, I wasn't involved in fucking anything.
I'm not surprised.
I'm not
Yeah, reminder. PC thought that Kash Patel won every exchange for this. Actual brain rot.
surprised
not
that you continue to lie
surprised that
from your purge and put on a show
view
so you can go
of
raise
you
money for your
and for good
charade.
reason.
You are a political buffoon at best.
Well,
Good one.
You can take
Take it to the bank that the FBI is protecting
Take it
this
to the
country
bank.
and the state and citizens of the California. We are being historic. All you care about is a child sex predator that was prosecuted by a prior administration, and the Obama Justice Department and the Biden Justice Department did squat. And what did President Trump do? Bring new
Watched him
charges
die?
courageously. And what have we done?
Chairman,
You said
take
I'm the most
control of the
transparent
situation.
FBI director in history.
Take control of the
33,000 pages of information to you. I checked.
Is this Grassley's thing? The 97-year-old dying corpse or whatever? I like how when it's a Republican, the guy can just rant and rant and rant and rant and rant, and there's no order, there's no call for order, there's no ejection, there's no telling him to shut the fuck up.
Reform,
internet
point of
story.
order,
Just goes
but all
and
you
goes and
care
goes and
about
goes and
is a
goes and
child
goes and
sex
goes.
predator that was prosecuted by a prior administration and the Obama Justice Department.
Optically, if you don't listen to the content, for the average American he did, I don't even know what the fuck that's supposed to mean. Like, if a guy walks up and eats shit, and if some people like the taste of shit, then that is a good meal. I don't know how I'm supposed to interpret such a retarded fucking statement.
And the Biden Justice Department did squat. And what did President Trump do? Bring new charges courageously. And what have we done?
Chairman,
You said
take
I'm the most
control of the
transparent
situation.
FBI director in history.
Take control of the
33,000 pages of information to you. I
there.
challenge you to say anything credibly to the truth. Go ahead and run to the cameras where you want to go now.
Both of you be quiet. Before I go to Senator Tillis, without objection, want to introduce
Oh,
you
he's
to the
awake.
record
Hey,
the
somebody
Durham
woke him up.
Annex. The Durham Annex is a declassified appendix to John Durham's report.
Oh,
about
we need to get our
Crossfire Hurricane.
Russiagate.
The Durham Annex contains information exposing a reported Clinton campaign plan to false.
Fucking joke.
So the thing I keep thinking about is, was it worth it to be happy for a little bit? Even though it ended up sad? Or would it have been better if the whole thing never happened?